she was a good kid and certainly had never any trouble with the law. Inside herself, though, Holly was fighting much bigger foes. She had some trauma that she'd experienced in the past, some sexual abuse by a relative, and a strained relationship with her parents. And so, when she exchanged telephone numbers with an attractive man she met at the mall, Hamilton Mall, in fact, in Atlantic County, New Jersey. I'm dreaming of Atlantic City here. It didn't take long for this man to prey on her. Later that evening, while Holly's parents were in one room, casually watching television, she was in another room, talking on the phone, sharing her struggles and her dreams with a man she later learned was more than twice her age. This man, who called himself Greg, told Holly exactly what she wanted to hear, of course. She's pretty enough to be a model and way too mature to go to high school. And he made his life seem glamorous. He traveled, he went to nightclubs, he went out, and he told Holly if she ran away with him, he would get her a fake ID and get her a job in the fashion or music industry. And that's what she wanted. She was getting ready to transition to high school. You know, she'd been bullied, she was depressed, and really just looking for a way out of this life she was living. She dreamed of becoming a songwriter and joining a band. And this man, this Greg, told her that he would help her pave the way to her dreams. Holly said that him convincing her to run away was not an overnight accomplishment. He took his time, he got to know her, he analyzed her troubles, asked her about her dreams. She wanted to meet Julia Roberts, she wanted to see Jim Morrison's grave in Paris, and this guy told her that he would help her do all that and more. Within 2 weeks of the first time that they met, she packed a bag with some clothes, her journal, pictures of her family and friends, some cassettes, and ran away from home. At first, Greg took her shopping, and they bought blonde hair dye, a red dress, and red high heels, 2 sizes too big for her size 5 feet. She thought, well, she needed these things to get into this nightclub because she was only 14. And then he took her to a hotel where he gave her a set of rules and introduced her to a woman named Nikki who helped her get dressed. And then he told her things like she needed to make $200 an hour. He gave her a new name, a new birth date, and a new address. And at this point, it became clear to 14-year-old Holly that they were talking about prostitution. They never used that exact word, but it became clear that that's exactly what they were talking about. Holly thought about running, of course, but she didn't know how she would get home, and she didn't want to face her parents and knew that she would be grounded if she went back home. The alternative, though, she recalled the confusion and fear when she was picked up by a cab she began to bond with Nikki. I mean, it's only 2 days, but she's the only lifeline that she had. She became dependent and attached to her, and describes feeling protected by Nikki on the streets. She didn't want to leave, but knew that she had to get away from Greg. After her first night on the streets, Greg raped her. It was part of her duties and obligations, he told her. He made it quite clear that she didn't have a choice in the matter. She was obligated to him. She didn't ask a lot of questions. She was timid and very unassertive and depressed. Sex traffickers look for kids who are struggling in some sort of way, so it's easier to lure them away. Now, as I mentioned, what came next was a blessing in disguise, although some people might call it a mixed blessing. She was arrested during a police sweep that targeted prostitutes, pimps, and johns, and recalled it as a very negative experience. The police officer called me names and was very, very mean, said Holly, adding that she was called a hooker and worse. They took her to the Atlantic City police station. They handcuffed her to a bench where she waited for her parents to pick her up. They sent her home without anything, and she had no understanding of what had happened to her, she says. In her book, she describes that night in jail. She says, "I believe I had forsaken the only people who cared about me. I believe that Greg and Nikki were the only adults who wouldn't judge me and really wanted to help me. Without immediate support and understanding from law enforcement, child victims of sex trafficking are left only with the support and understanding offered by their traffickers." Oh my gosh. I can't even, it sounds to me like she would have run right back to them because she felt like they were the only people who understood her. How many other people are doing this exact same thing now? I can't. Anyway, her parents came for her, and they took her home, and her father, people are racing down the main road here, rode in the back seat with her. When they got home, her parents sat her down at the dining room table, and her father started yelling. He called her so many names, and he just didn't understand. She says, in my father's defense, he and my mother must have been equally turned upside down. We were sent home with no counseling, no instructions for future action, no understanding what had just happened. All that my father knew was that I was refusing to identify the man who had prostituted me. Holly did eventually turn in the traffickers who were arrested and charged with second-degree endangering the welfare of a child and third-degree promoting prostitution. Greg was also charged with sexual assault of a minor between 13 and 16 years old. 20 years ago, there weren't any anti-trafficking laws in place. This pimp who raped and lured a child into prostitution served 365 days in jail. Holly said that following her experience, she attempted suicide, and she struggled for years, in fact even getting hospitalized twice to help get her through the trauma of what had happened to her. Her experience with law enforcement was awful. However, what was most tragic about the whole thing was the lack of immediate and long-term aftercare. When I attempted suicide following my interview with the police, it wasn't a cry for help. My intention was to succeed. Holly did eventually go back to school, but she was ostracized by her friends. Somebody found out what had happened to her and, of course, told other people, and it spread like wildfire, not flower. She was called a hooker and many other names that I won't mention here on my channel. And it took many years to recover from the trauma of those 36 hours. Holly did eventually get counseling, and it was decades later later before she realized that she had been a victim of human trafficking during that summer of 1992. Federal law defines the victims of human trafficking as young children, men and women, who are subjected to force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of sexual exploitation or forced labor. Holly Austin Smith's story is an example of sex trafficking, forced prostitution, which is a crime that many people associate with faraway places rather than the United States or the Philadelphia suburbs. When Americans hear the term human trafficking, they often envision victims in other countries. Holly says, "Too many people fail to realize that this is a crime happening right here on U.S. soil. This lack of education is endangering our young girls and boys, as they are often targeted by traffickers." Holly shares her story at events aimed to raise awareness for the growing problem and sharing ways that adults, law enforcement officials, and community advocates can help protect victims and prevent vulnerable teens from becoming victims. Holly's story was featured in a documentary called From Liberty to Captivity about sex trafficking in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She wrote a book called Walking Prey, and she addresses why she shares her story, and she says she tries to alert the public that victims of sex trafficking aren't prostitutes and they need rehabilitation and counseling services. Holly says, "I wish people would not blame the children for being in the circumstances that they are in." She's now a happily married mother who lives in Richmond, Virginia. When a child is involved in prostitution, it's a result of exploitative events that happen to this child, and sexual exploitation is the end result. Part of her healing, she says, has been helping others. "I advocate for immediate care because the child victim has probably been through a laundry list of issues, and it takes years to work through them and come out the other side empowered." Today, she's in her 30s and has a strong relationship with her family. After the ordeal, she graduated from high school. She went on to college. She got a degree in biology, which is amazing because I hate biology. Today, she works as a full-time biologist and travels the country raising awareness about what is needed to help those entrapped in modern-day slavery. She advocates for stronger anti-trafficking laws and greater protection for survivors of all forms of human trafficking. She also knows that skilled predators continue to use the same tactics to lure young people into prostitution as Greg used on her. She says, "I share my story and that of others in order to offer survivor insight, which I believe is a critical component often missing from current conversations about human trafficking. My hope is that readers will ultimately walk away with the understanding that prevention is the key against fighting against human trafficking, and that every day people have the means to get involved. Community members can get involved in a number of ways, from mentoring youth to donating time, money, or skills to local services for children and families." And as for Holly, she says she'll continue reminding the public that victims can emerge empowered and they can succeed in life. "Today I'm a biologist, I'm married, and I'm an author," she says. "It's important that the community know that these children are not lost causes. They are very savable, and they are worth every bit of effort we put into them." I wanted to share this story with you because sometimes on this channel we get a lot of gloom and doom. A lot on this channel. And every once in a while it is nice to hear a survival story, but we really haven't talked much about human trafficking or more sex trafficking here on this channel. It is scary. It is a scary thing. I mean, I was a little young in 1992 to be meeting men at the mall, but I definitely gave my number to strangers. I dated an older guy when I was really young and thought that I loved him. So you just don't know. I mean, in the modern day, we can monitor our children's cell phones, we can monitor who they're talking to, but in those days,